You're watching Fox 9 all day.
And hi, everyone. We're so glad that you're with us this afternoon. I'm Amy Hockert, and this is continuing live coverage of a plane crash in Toronto, a Delta flight from Minneapolis to Toronto. We want to say right off the bat that all 80 people on board this flight have been accounted for, and they have survived. And the majority of them walked off that plane by themselves without having to be treated at the hospital. And we are tracking some of those injuries right now. But we want to just bring you into the fold here. We've been covering this live now for the last couple of hours. This is a flight that left Minneapolis this morning at about 11:30 and landed our time at about 1:13 in Toronto, so Eastern time 2:13. And there are a lot of details that we have on the ground right now, but there are many more that we don't. Most importantly, all 80 people on board, 76 passengers and 4 crew members were able to get off of that plane. And it is flipped upside down. It is an incredible sight as you take a look at it, and we just want to let you know that everyone has been accounted for. We have several different people that we're getting some different perspectives on this and some different information on, and we want to go first to our Mike Manzoni, if Mike is ready to go, just to bring us up to speed on what it is we know right now, Mike.
Well, Amy, as you mentioned, the good news here is that everyone survived this crash. The FAA says that all 80 passengers were able to evacuate, but CTV, that's the Canadian television network up there, is reporting that at least 15 people are hurt. And at least a few of those injuries are critical. I want to show you this video here. The video you're looking at was shot by a passenger. It shows this jet, this Delta flight, upside down. You can see people getting out of the plane. They all appear to, or most of them appear to just walk away. That's really the amazing thing here. And there's some snow on the ground, but it's too early to know if the weather played any kind of role in this crash. Delta Flight 4819 left MSP this morning. It arrived in Toronto around 2:45 this afternoon local time. That's according to the FAA. Now, obviously, at some point, something went terribly wrong. The FAA says Canadian authorities will handle the investigation, but the NTSB will be assisting. Now, we're going to continue to monitor this crash here, check on any new updates, and bring you any new information as soon as we get it. For now, we're in the live center. Mike Manzoni, Fox 9.
All right, Mike, appreciate that. So again, welcome to those of you who are watching via your television for Fox 9 News at 5. If you're just tuning in, this is All Day Live, and we have been streaming since word of this plane crash came down just a couple of hours ago. As Mike just pointed out, that flight landed in Toronto at about 1:45 our time, and we have been covering it ever since. It has evolved quite a bit, but again, the most important thing to keep reiterating here is that incredibly, as you take a look at this plane that is flipped on its back, missing wings and part of the tail, as we can see with our own eyes, it's just incredible that they were able to evacuate. I do have some information just to drill down just a little bit more on these injuries. The Peel Regional Services, which is the ambulance services there in the area that transported these victims to area hospitals, 3 in critical condition, but they do emphasize that they have no life-threatening injuries to anyone at this time, and that is not changed now in the last couple of hours. And this is a statement that I'm seeing here just from the last, in about the last 15 minutes. So they are treating some critical injuries in at least a couple of people, 2 to 3. We know that one is a child. That's also been reported by several agencies, including CTV, which is the feed that you're taking a look at now. Ryan is in the booth for us as well, producing. So Ryan, this is a live shot that we're taking a look at. I just want to confirm. Ryan, I don't know if you can hear me or not. I presume this is live just because we've been going back and forth, and if the scene's a little darker, the sun is setting. If not, it's getting ready to set. If not already set there in Toronto. So if we go back and forth, we've been taking some video from a little earlier this afternoon, and if it's brighter and lighter out, it's from this afternoon. But this might be
Yeah, Amy, this is a live
look
at
okay.
Toronto Pearson. As we were looking, the sun set there about 13 minutes ago,
Okay.
so we are now into the evening hours. But this is live. This is first responders. That is that Delta. It is a little bit difficult to see as the sun starts to go down, but this is a live shot from CTV in Canada.
So one thing I just wanted to sort of point out, and a couple of things we've been talking about here, aviation experts will tell you that incidents like this, crashes, incidents, serious incidents, it's never just one thing that is the cause. It's a series of things. It's a chain reaction of several things. The investigation in its very early stages, obviously, as Mike said, the NTSB coordinating with the Transportation Safety Board of Canada. The things that are just obvious that we've been looking at here over the course of the last couple of hours is the weather. And you'll see right now from time to time the snow, the dusting of snow that's on the top of this is blowing around. And what you may or may not know is that Toronto has had back-to-back snowstorms and has been dumped on. And I'm wondering if Ian is near the mic, if he can move into this and lean in just a little bit and talk to us about, Ryan's going to try to coordinate that, because we were talking a little bit earlier about the weather conditions, not just today, but leading up to this. And I had been reading that at the airport, the workers there had been working around the clock just to try to clear the runways for today in preparation for flights coming in and out. So Ian, you're with Kelsey, and I want to ask Kelsey a question here in a minute as well, but Ian, can you help us understand the environment in which this plane would have been landing?
Okay, so imagine this, you take somewhere like Toronto, but let's bring it home and make this all about, say we had 20 to 25 inches of snow here in the greater Twin Cities metro. What that would mean for our airport. And, our airport is incredible at taking care of business, but it slows down both inbound for landing, trying to clear the runways, and outbound, clearing the runways and also de-icing. Toronto is a massive city, top 5 largest city in North America. Pearson Airport, I think, is the 3rd or 4th busiest airport in all of North America. Some 50 million passengers go through Pearson every single year. And if you've ever gone through there, the international arrivals area, it's as big as MSP. It is a massive airport. Now, conditions through Thursday into the day today, 20 to 25 inches of snow. Wind gusts through this afternoon at 40 to almost 50 miles per hour. And that started at around 9 a.m. right through where we sit right now. I mean, you look at this picture, even though we're starting to lose sunlight, you can see that very dry wind whipped snow. And earlier I was talking about shear. Now we'll talk a lot about wind and was weather really a factor here? And it's a lot of assumption at this point, or even summation, but there's a part of me that says there's no way that weather wasn't a factor here. We talk about shear. That's wind speeds at different directions, at different levels of the atmosphere. And we're not talking a spread here of over thousands of feet. Once we get to the ground in large, wide open spaces like most airports are, you can have shear or variability between 100, 200, 300, and 400 feet. So you end up with 40 to 55 mile per hour winds that are turning. We've all been on planes that are a little scary when you land, right? Feels like the plane is coming in a little slanted. Well, that's the pilot going rudder left and foot pedals right, trying to veer into the wind right before the plane lands. Then they'll straighten it out and they'll let the plane pop down. The bigger, heavier planes like the 737 MAX or 747s, 57s, 67s, these are big planes and they do much better, although it's still a scary ride in these big crosswinds. These smaller planes that have become almost the go-to now as airlines are trying to save money, these smaller planes, this is a CRJ. CRJ 900 holds 80 people. We've been on them. It's 2 seats on every aisle. It's a very thin center aisle, but they're very fuel efficient. They're also very light, which makes them more economical to fly. Pack them up and fly them everywhere. They don't do well in 40 and 50 mile per hour wind shear on a very slippery runway. It was cleared of snow, but I have no doubt in my mind there was some packed snow and ice on that runway after all of the planes taking off, landing, the friction of the wheels, then 20 to 25 inches of snow. So it's kind of like a compounding effect when you start to think of air travel. We all know that if you've done any amount of flying out of MSP, trying to get de-icing done, waiting for the jetway that's frozen and it can't get to the plane. And, my friend was on a jet last week and they were about to leave MSP in the morning and they couldn't leave because the toilet facilities froze overnight. I mean, these are little tiny things, but they compound air travel. And once you get up into the sky, those magnificent yet invisible to the naked eye highways that all of these planes travel on, all those planes got to be gathered in at some point and then come into these airports. And it is minute by minute. And it has to happen at a certain time to avoid turbulence, to avoid air traffic, to avoid traffic on the taxiways. There's an awful lot going on weather-wise this morning that made it very, very hard.
Yeah. And the logistics, just in general, when you're talking about all this air traffic, especially going into a busy airport like Pearson there. So they have resumed flights in and out of Pearson. So almost, 3 hours after this crash happened, surprising a little bit to see that flights have resumed there.
Well, I think what this will tell you too, as you look at the live picture, and that's Pearson, I believe I'm pretty sure it's runway B, but don't quote me on it. So where you see the terminal in the background, that's almost at the end of this runway run. And that's why I was talking about this being after the plane had touched down, had started to slide. They had the reverse thrusters on, they had negative lift on the flaps. So the plane wasn't going to lift off, but it makes it really hard to steer on an icy road. Think about your car. It's flipping on 494 at 60 miles per hour. So they're reducing airspeed. And then it looks to me like this happened when the plane had lost a lot of its forward momentum. That doesn't mean you're not going to get a crash, but you're going to end up with a crash that doesn't obliterate the fuselage.
And then in addition to coming off of all of this snow and bad weather over the weekend, they were trying to catch up today. There is another winter weather travel advisory in effect for Toronto overnight, and they're expecting more snow, reduced visibility.
It's a beast of a storm. You know, if anybody watches hockey, the Four Nations Cup was being played in Montreal. All the players, all the teams left Montreal split seconds after the game finished because of this storm approaching. And this storm has dominated parts of Eastern Canada. There's another wave moving through. You know, when I first moved here some 20 plus years ago, people say, well, it gets cold here, you know, but not where I'm from. And that's a lesson here in Toronto. Toronto also has a problem too, in that it's right on the shores of Lake Ontario. So you end up with a few different microclimates. You can end up with icing problems instead of snow problems. It's a dilemma that this plane, I would suspect, flew right into a hardcore weather dilemma.
And Amy, we have an update too. CTV had reported a little while ago that it looked like the NTSB would take the lead. They have tweaked that now, saying that they will be assisting the Canadian investigators. So no doubt both agencies are going to be working together on this investigation that will take some time. They may give us some preliminary information even today or tomorrow in the coming months, but a complete investigation sometimes can take more than a year. We also have an updated statement from Delta tonight. They report, of course, no fatalities, 18 customers with injuries. Some have been transported to area hospitals, and their primary focus is on the people who were on this plane tonight. They have assisted folks and their families with a phone number to call. And the flight, again, carrying about 80 people, 76 passengers, 4 crew members. They've canceled all their flights to and from the airport, Pearson in Toronto, for the remainder of the evening. And they've issued a travel waiver. All the details can be found at delta.com. But again, and there are officials at Pearson who've been stationed there at the arrival gates for the last few hours to greet any family members of passengers who were on this flight, and to also help the passengers who did have to escape this situation.
And as much as we take ownership of this, because it is a plane that left Minneapolis to go to Toronto, there's probably going to be numerous passengers that were pass-throughs who were on their way from another place, got onto the plane here in Minneapolis, and then went through. I'm sorry if you see me on camera checking my phone. CTV Network was my home in Canada. So I'm just checking with some of my friends north of the border to see if we can just hone down some of the information.
Yeah, but I mean, no doubt this, from what you've said, what some of the aviation experts that the Toronto Star has interviewed already today, some small miracles, big miracles perhaps happening with this crash, the fact that there wasn't a giant fireball.
I think the plane did exactly as it was designed to do at this airspeed or ground speed. You know, once it's on the ground, it's ground speed. I think it did exactly what it was supposed to do. The wings come off when it teeters back and forth. It loses all of its nav fuel. As I mentioned earlier, that is so much less combustible than the gas that you put in your car. It's almost like kerosene. It's harder to light, but it's also harder to freeze. That's why we use it in airplanes at high altitudes. So the plane came apart, and I know that sounds weird to say. The plane came apart the way it was supposed to at this ground.
Right. And when you first see those images, if you don't know much about aviation, that it looks so terrible. But the way that you explain it, it makes a lot of sense now. That this is by design in this situation. Things perhaps
like the crumple of your car.
Plan.
You know, you see all those crash tests where they zip the cars at the walls and they try and figure out how the car reacts to hitting the wall. And they want the car to react a certain way at certain speeds in certain conditions. And the same is true when you talk about airplanes. And I think most people think, well, I don't want any part of the airplane coming off. But in this particular case, once we lose the wings, we lose the gas tanks, and ostensibly there was a little left over that was still on fire in some of the videos. That was put up very quickly by the ground crews at Pearson. I know it doesn't look like it. We've all been upside down on roller coasters, and it's not fun.
No.
You can't even imagine what these people went through on the airplane. But to have them all self-evacuate, even though 3 people are in critical condition, I think it's remarkable.
Yeah,
it really is. And yeah, just to, if we could, and I do want to come back to you because Kelsey, I want to talk about an interview that you just happened to have when this story was breaking. So but first though, if we could take a look at some of the video that we got, Ryan, online. I think it's a storyful video, and this was maybe the moment. This was just after the plane had landed. It was on its back, and then everyone is off of the plane at this point, but it's still shortly thereafter. And if you look underneath the plane, kind of where the water is going to be coming, you'll see, if I remember right, this is that video where you're going to see some flame. There we go, some flames coming out. So this is just moments after everyone had deplaned. And they're going to be off to the side, some of them, and you'll be able to see in just a second. But as Ian was saying, these ground crews on it, they were in place. There was some communication that I heard between the medevac and the tower, where they were just very calmly saying, there are people standing around outside. The plane is upside down and it's burning. So it's a very controlled situation at this point. When you see the video of these folks getting off of the plane, it's not chaotic or hectic. Everyone's just sort of filing off almost calmly. And, you know, are they in shock, or are they do they just feel like, okay, I've got my feet on the ground
it's
and I'm
almost
away
reminiscent,
from that plane.
Amy?
But go ahead, Ian.
It's almost reminiscent of when the plane went down in the Hudson River.
Right.
And you remember all the boats were streaming toward it, and there were people just standing. I mean, they didn't have any other recourse, but they were standing almost so calmly on the wings of the plane, waiting for boats to pick them up. I think there's like this self-induced anxiety that just calms you after you're free and clear of the crash site, and you see all those people huddled together near the fire trucks, and no doubt thinking, what have I just been through?
Right. I'm sure there's just a shock that sets in that helps you get through the situation, and you won't process it for days, maybe months later.
Years.
Maybe years, right? Because you're set on helping out everybody around you and getting out of that situation, and getting into safety.
The logistics of it all. We've all, been on these planes as they're coming in on that approach, and you're buckled in, and your tray table's up, and everything's kind of in its right place, and you're just holding on. And Ian, as you said earlier, you might have a little turbulence that might give your stomach kind of a little, put it in knots a little bit. But imagine now that plane is flipped over on its back, and you're presumably still in your seat belt, and now you got to find a way to get out. And that's when that crew comes in, and obviously this is what they're trained for, is to safely get you off of that plane within a matter of a couple of minutes, is always the goal. So just an incredible sight as we take a look at some video from earlier today. But Ryan is telling me that we may have some additional video that I don't think we've been able to show yet. Ryan, is that right?
Mike's video.
Okay.
From earlier that Mike showed, that kind of more of an up close. Tom, if you want to line 7 there, take a look at this. This is kind of the closest we've been to that flight, and this is the immediate aftermath, and you can see those passengers, and that's what we were kind of talking about. All things considered, there's control, there's calm, and look what's going on behind them. I mean, that's pretty remarkable to see that.
Wow, just amazing. Again, we presume it's a fairly full flight because this is a light plane that would carry about that many people, 76 passengers, 4 crew members, and all 80 people able to get out. And just reiterating for those who may be just kind of tuning in and out, we just want to bring you up to speed. This is a Delta flight that left Minneapolis this morning around 11:30 our time and landed in Toronto at about 1:45 our time. And at some point, it flipped as it was landing, and we have not yet seen, it has not yet been reported at what point it flipped. But as Ian was walking us through just the process of when a plane is coming in for a landing, and just seeing that the plane itself, the body of the plane is mostly intact. It's just sort of the ancillary parts, the wings, the tail that were broken off, that they were presumably, at a speed at which, they weren't going to spin too much farther out of control. Ian was saying that where that plane is, he's very familiar with that airport. It's not all that far off from the runway, and you can't see it right now. This is a live look, and it's dark. But on the right side of the screen, kind of on the other side of where all the lights are, where the building is, there were many planes that were sort of lined up in that area. So not too far off from where these planes were coming in and landing and taxiing in. But again, just an incredible scene. And for some people who have been following the news of plane crashes and plane incidents in the last month even, just frightening to be able to see something like this. But again, know that everyone on board is accounted for, and those who are injured, 19 people taken to area hospitals. And according to the Peel Regional Services, which is the medical services in that area, 3 in critical condition. But again, no one with life-threatening injuries. So we want to be sure and let you know that as well. Just incredible. Starting to hear stories from some of the folks who are on the plane now on social media. They're sharing some of their accounts, and just amazing. Ryan, are we looking at any sort of a briefing that's going to be coming up? I know you talked about that just a bit ago.
Yeah, so a couple things here. Toronto Pearson saying there will be a media briefing here coming up in 10 minutes, so 6:30 Toronto time, 6:30 Eastern time. And this will really be the first opportunity for us to hear from officials on the ground there, who will hopefully give us some better indication on some of those injuries that we've reported. And again, we know 3 in critical condition, and we know that 1 of them is a child. Do not know the age of that child. This is a live look outside Toronto Pearson right now as the sun has set. I just want to go over this number because we know this flight started from MSP, so there is Delta is a big hub here, so there could be a connecting flight, but the chance there could be Minnesotans on board. Delta sharing this number, and Tom, if you could put it on the screen, it's in line 6 there. This is a number that people can call Delta. It's 1-800-997-5454. It's on your screen there. If someone is worried that somebody is on that flight that they know, this is kind of your direct connection to Delta, and hopefully they can get some information on passengers on board that flight. Again, 76 passengers, 4 crew members on that flight, Amy.
All right, Ryan, thanks for that update. Is Kelsey still there by any chance?
Yes.
All right, great, Kelsey. So interestingly enough, this story, we saw this come down at about 1:45 or so our time, 2 o'clock, and you happen to be in an interesting position at that point in an interview. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
So we actually did the interview before the crash. As we were leaving Sun Country Airlines, that's when we got our notification that this crash had happened. But I was talking to Jude Bricker, the CEO of Sun Country, and we were discussing just the airline in general, but also, what's happening, pilot shortages, and, his thoughts on air traffic control. But what came up in that interview was that all of the airlines, because we talked about the American Airlines crash in DC, afterwards, all of the airlines work very well together as an industry to find out what happened, work on any kind of change. They're competitors when it comes to getting consumers to fly their airline, but they're very much one unit when it comes to safety in the industry. And he mentioned, of course, in the United States, it had been since 2009 since a commercial airline disaster of that scale. But that collaboration and then just the busyness of the skies these days, too, and that staffing has been a concern. And because there are so many planes up there, and Ian had spoken to that, you have highways in the sky. And in some places like Florida, especially with Cape Canaveral being so busy now, they have there's a narrow pathway into that peninsula. And March and April, coming from Minnesota to Florida, is busy. Mm-hmm. For some airlines, that is the busiest time of year for them. So we talked a lot about just how things work behind the scenes. And we know that we have 2 investigative agencies working on this as well. Basically, as many people as possible will be going into this and looking to see what they can do better. Weather is always going to be an issue.
Always. And it's, I think weather can sometimes be a bit of a fallback. I totally understand that. You have big heavies coming in, 767, 747s, and they're going to do fine in that wind shear, if you will. But what happens with these little tiny commuter jets? At what point does the air traffic control with the resident meteorologist say, okay, this type of plane can land in the next 3 hours. This type of plane can't. Mm-hmm. But then when you end up with regional jets, they don't have the staying power. Like a big jet can stay up for an hour and say, okay, well, we'll land in an hour. It's too busy down there. The weather's too bad. A little tiny regional jet doesn't have that capability. They're supposed to get up and get down and get on with their day. It's kind of like having a smaller SUV versus some of these monsters that you see on the road right now. And one thing that was interesting when we were looking at that incredible video that was obviously just minutes after the plane had crashed is that you could see the runway and you could see it'd be kind of like driving down the highway and the wind's whipping across, just looking at it, that's getting polished by those ice crystals. And you can see there was a lot of hard pack on there. So, and the people who work at the airports, these ground teams are incredible. And the technology they use is equally as incredible. But snow is going to do what snow does, and that's adhere to concrete, adhere to blacktop. And once that starts, it gets harder and harder to get done. I noticed we're getting ready for the press conference out of Pearson International here at 6:30.
Which, is set to happen in about 5 minutes, 6:30 Eastern time. Those ground crews are incredible. The way that they get those runways cleared so that a place like MSP can operate flights year-round in most types of weather conditions, it's incredible. And on a day like today when you have de-icing as well. But I was telling Ian, looking at those shots at Pearson of the runway, it reminds me of growing up in Indiana, the flat lands that we had in, the cornfields. And you can see as far as the eye can see for miles sometimes. And when it would snow, a little bit of snow would create blinding whiteout conditions because there's nothing to stop it. And kind of reminds me as we watch tonight, and they have more bad weather coming in this evening. So even though they've resumed flights at Pearson, weather's going to continue to be an issue for Toronto.
And think about, this is a bit of a stretch, but you think about Top Gun, where they say, Maverick, you've got the ball. And he says, Roger, Maverick's got the ball. That's basically a light array on an aircraft carrier that's letting you know if you're too high, too low, what your trajectory is like. All of the major airports in North America have an array of lights. There are 4 red lights at the end of the runway, and they let you know as a pilot when you're on your final and you're doing your visual, if you're too high, if you're too low, if you're a little off. And in this particular case, if your visibility is low, you've got wind shear, you've got snow, blowing snow, trying to get an eye on the lights, there's an awful lot going on. These planes are incredible machines. The most dangerous time to be operating a plane is takeoff and landing. Right. And when weather interferes, that danger goes up exponentially.
So we'll perhaps get some preliminary information, probably at 5:30, 6:30 Eastern time with this briefing, most likely just some of the basic facts. Sure. They'll be addressing the media, explaining when the flight left, how many people were on the plane, injuries at this point, what they know about what happened with the crash, also the state of the airport right now, flights in and out of.
Interesting to see if there's any video.
Yeah, and then also the ripple effect, because there were other airports in Canada that were impacted, of course, by
Montreal, Winnipeg. There's multiple airports in and around the GTA, the Greater Toronto area. This is going to have rippling effects for a long time, and I think it's going to rework how we take modern technology and still push it together with weather. Modern technology is really good, but weather has never changed. It is still the most powerful thing to get in our way. And maybe we need to rethink how we're flying when the weather gets as bad as it was earlier today.
Well, no doubt all of the people who head these major airlines will be discussing just that. Yeah. How can we continue to improve? That is a constant conversation in the airline industry.
Thank you guys, and just continue to stick with us here as we wait for this this briefing to start. There's the live shot of the briefing, and we'll definitely take you there as soon as it begins. But a couple of things you guys were talking about, as we have been learning so much more about the aviation industry, and I know, Ian, obviously this is something that that you know more than the average person about. And again, I just want to remind folks that this is video from earlier today. Anytime you see video where there's daylight or a picture where there's daylight like this, it's going to be from earlier today. The live shot that we have right now is at night, but this was just moments after that plane crashed at Toronto's airport, that Delta flight, and everyone on board had gotten off at this point. And those who needed to be taken to the hospital were being transported to the hospital. The camera's going to go over just a little bit here, and you're going to see what we presume to be at least some of those passengers who were already off of that plane. But again, those ground crews doing their thing. But as we've been talking about the weather and just the incredible impact that it's had, we don't know yet on this particular instance, but on that area, and the snow that was dumped and the wind. These aviation experts that I've been listening to for the last couple of months as they've been talking about how they investigate these types of crashes, again, it's not just ever one thing. It is an accumulation of several different things, usually a chain reaction event. One former NTSB investigator I listened to actually just last week was talking about how if you take a look at the incidents that we've seen here in the U.S., which I think in our minds, because we rarely or never hear about them, all of a sudden in the last month you felt like, well, there was, Vince Neil's private plane that had the landing gear issue, and then there's this, and then there's that, and we feel like, boy, it just seems like right now there are things that we're talking about that we never used to talk about when it comes to airline crashes. But again, I say this to just reiterate that these investigators say there are no threads as they take a look at everything that's happened in the last couple of months here in the U.S. There are no threads that they see that they can point to say, oh, this was it or that was it. It is just, a string of different causes, right? He said you can spend a week, the first week of that investigation, going down one lane and thinking this is it, only to have that theory completely blown up and then starting over again. So to Kelsey's point, these investigations are long and arduous and tenuous, there's just so much that goes into it that at this point we can talk about things like the weather, which was definitely impacting that environment at the time, and it has in the last couple of days. We can talk about the friction that the tires may or may not have, from the blowing snow glossing over. We can talk about the potential of landing gear, and these are all the things that investigators will take a look at as it's the Canadian, the Transportation Safety Board of Canada works, hand in glove with the NTSB here in the United States to come up with answers in this at some point.